59. Carnal and sensual pleasures. 31st March, 1847. You know that certain people are very afflicted with carnal desire, both female and male, while there are other people in whom the sensual carnal nature is almost completely dull. Such people do not move because of this, even when the most delightful flesh would be placed before them. A luscious woman's foot, an arm, a breast as the usual symbols of the female gender for the awakening of the sensual drive in men often move a not carnal addict as little as a scrawny tree branch. Whereas others again become completely furious at the sight of these female signs of attraction. Yes, there are fools who can fall in love with a female arm to such an extent that they become completely mad if they cannot get such a woman to be their wife, or at least for the temporary sensual enjoyment. The reason for such carnal inclination, especially if it is expressed very violently, usually lies in being possessed by one or more horny flesh devils. But how do these get into the flesh of such a man? People themselves prepare opportunities for this without number and measure. Such flesh devils dwell first in hot drinks, in wine, also in beer, and especially in the distilled spirits. When people get intoxicated with such drinks, they have certainly absorbed one, if not more, flesh devils into their flesh. But once they are in the flesh, they itch and torment the genitals in such a bad way that man cannot avoid satisfying such itchiness through the sensual enjoyment of the flesh, either with women or sometimes even with animals. These devils of the flesh are, of course, nothing else than dishonest souls of such deceased people, who were also very devoted either to drunkenness or to carnal sensuality. They pass into the flesh of a still living person for a reason of betterment. But because the flesh was their element, they not infrequently do it even worse in such a person whom they have possessed than they used to do it in their own flesh. These deceased souls of the flesh, when they go too far and inflame themselves more and more in their impure lust, also cause in most cases the abominable and very dangerous so-called syphilitic diseases, which is allowed by the protecting angel spirits, so that the soul of the actual human being does not completely perish in the raging fury of its flesh. So such heated drinks are the first way by which these flesh devils come into the flesh of man. The second way, just as dangerous as the first, are the public dances, where you can always assume that at a ball or other dance entertainment there are always 10 times as many invisible carnal unclean souls as there are guests at such a ball. This is the easiest way for them to get into the flesh. which is very much excited here, and is therefore extremely receptive to such filthy creatures of the soul. For which reason, after such a ball, people also feel a formal aversion to everything higher and loftier, which can easily be observed by everyone in the cities, especially among students, since it is not uncommon for quite diligent students to come after a ball, instead of thinking about their books, have only the white neck, bosom, arm, and the eyes of their dancer constantly before their faces, and their minds are occupied with almost nothing else, but only with the object that had given them such great pleasure at the ball. Many a student let go of studying altogether. Some, however, instead of science, only studies bread in order to become a couple with his lovely dancer as soon as possible, and so be it. And if such a couple really becomes a married couple, then that is also a married couple, which looks as little like an actual married couple as does night like day. Such a married couple spend their initial time only in sexual pleasure, and so that within a short time almost all elements destined to form procreative power are consumed to below zero. Then usually soon a complete slackening of the flesh, and especially of the genitals, occurs. In such cases, the flesh devil dwelling in such people seeks a remedy by whispering to the soul, especially through the kidneys, like a kind of family doctor, to turn to other flesh. Thus, man soon becomes disgusted with women, and the husband with his wife. She gradually begins to look around for youthful house friends, and he, however, usually goes in the evening to look for fresh air, and if he is more able, he makes journeys for a greater change of air. And so the matter goes on, until in time such a married couple gets so tired of each other that they soon divorce, or they leave each other without judicial divorce. Or if it is more noble and aristocratic in such a house, then a convention is made that each part can do with regard to his sensual pleasure as it pleases him best. Such phenomena, which are currently very common, are only fruits of ball and dance entertainments, and are consequences of being possessed by the aforementioned bad flesh patrons. This possession never manifests itself at first with the vehemence as in the case of some who have taken in such unclean spirits through heated drinks. But the spirits from the heated drinks are easily removed by a strong prayer of the soul through one's spirit, whereupon the normal state of the flesh can again occur. But the possessions on the way of public dance amusements are not so easy to bring out, and for this a lot of fasting, praying, and self-denial is required, by which the soul unites more and more with its spirit, which then reaches through it and gets the bad riffraff out of the house of the soul. But where is such a dancer who would do that? Usually, they eat even more during and after the dance than before, and thereby want to restore themselves, which means just as much as guaranteeing the flesh devil a pension and accommodation with the soul and blood for life. Some dancers, if they have too many of these guests in them, perish in a short time. For these evil flesh heroes, if they do not find room in the kidneys and genital parts, also set up their dwelling in the spleen, liver, or even in the lungs. But where such an emigrant from hell sets up his dwelling, he kills the flesh in a certain way, and the consequences of this are hardening of the spleen and liver, and in the lungs, lung disease, emaciation, or also, if two or more have thrown themselves on the lungs, the so-called galloping lung disease. Tuberculosis, translator. I tell you, and you can safely accept it, most illnesses in people come from their infernal inhabitants, which they themselves paved the way for in their flesh. These are, therefore, true children of the world, and many of them begin school for hell in their youth. But so that they should not notice that they are harbouring strange guests of the filthiest kind in their flesh, these spirits not only seek to make the flesh of their landlords as sensual as possible, but they also have such an effect on the soul that it begins to be very pleased with all kinds of worldly things. These worldly things are fashion. The charming flesh must be embellorated according to the fashion. The hair burned, the skin rubbed with fragrant specimens, and with the male individuals, the infernal cigar may not be missing, and many a young fashionable dolt, if he has some money, not rarely consumes so much in one day that 10 poor people could have bought enough bread. But do you know what this smoke fashion means? The evil inhabitants try to accustom the soul to the infernal vapour and stench while it is still alive, so that it will not become aware of its stinking company as soon as it leaves the body. Nor will it feel it too soon when this clean company leads it quite unnoticed into the third hell. It has already been said that every soul after death first comes into the company of the angels, where its evil company has to leave immediately. This also happens in this case. However, such a soul does not remain in the company of the angels, but is put into such a position by them where it becomes possible for it to complete itself. More clearly spoken, it is placed in such a place where it can regain, through a certain free activity, those specifics necessary for its completion, which it had wasted in this world. This is then the place where the former bad flesh society can approach such a soul unnoticed. However, since these infernal beings stink quite violently pestilentially, for a soul that is only moderately pure, and the soul easily notices their presence. In this case, however, the soul's sense of smell is often so corrupted that it does not notice such approaches. For there is not much talk about sight anyway, since firstly, the soul still has too little light, and the sight of the soul, anyway, only comes from inside. Therefore, it can only see what is in it, and not what is outside of it. Such spirits, however, are outside such a soul. Therefore, it does not see them. But through the sense of smell, it can perceive their presence and determine their position exactly. And when it has done so, it can withdraw into its spirit, which enlightens it as soon as possible, whereby it can then also see immediately where its enemies are and what they want to do. And once the infernals see the face of the soul, they flee in a flash. For an infernal spirit can bear anything rather than the eye of a pure soul, but even less, of course, that of an angel. And to protect them from my eye, mountains are called to cover them. From this, however, you can easily see why I have often railed against the highly detestable tobacco smoking. At the same time, you have seen from this memorandum how excessive carnal desire arises in man and what it leads to, and how people can easily protect themselves from it. Next, we will consider another scenario again and take proper note.